Hello, welcome back to my channel. In this episode I'm doing another book report. This time it's The Story of the Amulet by E. Nesbit. That's Edith Nesbit, published in 1906, and it's a children's book, and it's also a fantasy book as far as I'm concerned. It's children's fantasy. It actually, interestingly, this book influenced C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia in a number of ways, most notably the fact that in this book the Queen of Babylon travels through time and visits London, contemporary London at the time the book was set, and of course that is echoed in C.S. Lewis's The Magician's Nephew. It's kind of stolen from this. So in several ways this was an inspiration for things that occurred in the Narnia books. It's the third of a trilogy of books about the same children and the same mythological creature. The children are Cyril, Robert, Anthea and Jane, from eldest to youngest, and these are good, rosy-cheeked Edwardian children. They're proper middle-class kids, nicely educated, nicely spoken, polite, considerate. They're basically the same as Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy. And they have various adventures. The adventures start with the story Five Children and It, where they're staying in the country and they discover in a sand pit, they discover a creature called the Psammead, who is a sand fairy from ancient Egypt with the power to grant wishes. And the children have various adventures where they make a series of very foolhardy wishes, all of which get granted by the Psammead and end up in various disastrous ways. That story was followed up by The Phoenix and the Carpet, and this book is then the third of the series where the children re-meet the Psammead again. This time the Psammead, having learned from previous experiences, makes it very, very clear to the children right from the offset that he will not be granting any wishes anymore. So this story begins when Cyril, Robert, Anthea and Jane are staying at a guest house in London. Their parents are overseas and they're being looked after by a nice old lady who doesn't come into the story very much. While they're off exploring the shops in London, they come across a pet shop, and huddled up in the back of a hutch in the pet shop is the very unfortunate, dishevelled and miserable Psammead, who of course is delighted to encounter his old friends and convinces them to buy him and thus rescue him from misery in a London pet shop. So the kids buy the Psammead, and he's so delighted that even though he's sworn that he won't grant them any more wishes, he does reward them by leading them to a historical artifact of great magical powers. And this artifact is half of an amulet, and it has the power to transport the children to any time and place in history where it has existed as a whole amulet, thereby allowing the children to travel back in time to find the amulet in its completed form and therefore restore it to a whole amulet again. That's the basic premise, and so of course that's a great jumping off ground for the children to have lots of adventures. They go to various places. They go to ancient Egypt, they go to Babylon, they go to ancient Gaul, where Julius Caesar is just about to invade Britain. He's actually just decided that Britain isn't worth invading, but Jane very enthusiastically tells him how lovely England is, and so he changes his mind, and therefore Julius Caesar invaded England because Jane couldn't keep her mouth shut. I think that's a rather nice touch. It's a very, very British book. It's a very Edwardian British book. It's written by the same author who gave us The Railway Children. It's very much in the same vein. The writing style, the language and vernacular are very similar. Like many of the books that I enjoy reading, this is something that you can snuggle up with on a cold winter's day, wrap yourself in a duvet and read a gorgeous book that is so short you can read this in a few hours. Another thing that I love about children's books of this era is that they all have these lovely black and white line drawings like that. I don't know if you can see it, but the kids take the Psammead in a fish basket. He travels with them to all these various places. He offers them advice, and another advisor in the book is a kindly old gentleman, much like the old gentleman in the Narnia Chronicles, who starts off as Diggory in The Magician's Nephew and ends up as the old professor in the house where Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy have their first experience of Narnia. And that professor, I think, is kind of based on the learned gentleman. I think he's described as the learned gentleman. He lives upstairs at the guest house where these kids are living. They make friends with him. He's an Egyptologist, and he eventually comes on one of the adventures with them, and that's thrilling. Of course, he thinks he's having a dream. He thinks it's a wonderful dream, and he really hopes he doesn't wake up. It's a really nice book. I love it. It's been a treasured book ever since I was a very small child, and I still read it every now and then. Of the 3 books featuring these children and the Psammead, this is by far my favourite. By book 3, the characters of the children are fully developed, and the character of the Psammead is fully developed, and I prefer the structure of the adventures in this book. I like the fact that they've got a gateway to other times and other places that they can travel through at will and go off and have adventures and then come back again in time for tea. I like the fact that it's a very structured story. They've got a goal, they've got an ultimate objective, which is to reunite the 2 halves of the amulet. It's a sensible, intelligent and enjoyable premise that they travel back in time to find it when it's already complete. It gives us trips to various famous places from the past. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. If you can get all 3 books, by all means read the entire trilogy. But this book, in my opinion, stands alone. It works completely as an individual, self-contained book. It references a few things that have happened in the previous books, but not in a way that you need to have read those books, and not in a way that makes you feel that you've missed out if you haven't read those books. But in my personal opinion, you don't need to read the other books, and the other books are kind of inferior to this one. By book 3, E. Nesbit had got the formula perfectly right. And on that note, I think I'll call it a day. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I will see you next time. See you later.